Well, it looks like we've got a lot of people here coming on, so I guess we can go ahead and jump right in and get started. Y'all know me. Hi, everybody. And I am so excited to be here with Dr. Tim Spector, who wrote the foreword for Cleanish. We're actually doing a book study for Cleanish right now, Tim, and I'm really getting into that and enjoying it. But would you tell everybody a little bit about you and your background and how you got interested in personalized nutrition in general?
Yeah, sure. And it's a great privilege to finally hook up with you and all your amazing followers. So I'm looking forward to this session. So I'm really bit frightened about all those really tough questions I'm going to get that won't be able to answer.
They'll be amazing questions. And they're a great group. So even if like something crazy happened, like if Ellie ran through my cat with a lizard, we'd be okay.
Okay.
They're not going to be tricky.
So my career, I trained as a medic and always was interested in research, but got into rheumatology. So I became a consultant and specialist in rheumatology, bones and joints, specializing in osteoporosis. But always wanted to do research. So I did a master's in epidemiology and kept my research program always going. And then just after I got my sort of big job as in a teaching hospital, I started the Twin Registry at St. Thomas's, which is on just opposite Big Ben in London. And this was a very special thing to do because there was nothing else like it in the UK and only a few like it in the world. And that's given us 14,000 identical and non-identical twins to study, which has really been a treasure trove for me. So I having done epidemiology, I also then taught myself genetics and got into being a twin expert and wrote a book on twins by why twins are actually different to each other. That was called Identically Different, which was a really fun book to write because I actually interviewed twins on an individual basis who gave very fascinating stories about how their lives had diverged, how, one had become very religious, the other one atheist, how one had put on weight, the other one got skinny after some family traumas, or how one was depressed and happy, cancer, autoimmune disease, allergies, all these kind of things. So that really fascinated me originally in that. And then that made me get into trying to work out why were they different if they had the same genes. And that took me to an area called epigenetics, which don't hear much about now, but it was very big about sort of 10 years ago. And it's about how you can switch your genes on and off with chemical signals.
And I really think we should be talking about that more because epigenetics are so very powerful.
They are, and we are talking about them a lot in cancer. And there are some drugs actually in cancer that do this. But the reason that I switched really from epigenetics to the gut microbiome was that I realized that, I got lots of big grants for this and and I had a big team of about 20 people working on this with me. But the effects we were seeing were small. They were definitely there, but they were small. And the technology wasn't such that we could really tease it all apart or apply it to everyday use. So we couldn't link things like foods with which foods to eat to change your genes, which vitamins might help you or not. It was all a bit too theoretical. And so that's when I started looking around for something else that could explain why identical twins are different. And that's where I got onto the gut microbes. And that was the sort of aha moment, suddenly saying, wow, we've just done this big study. We did it with Cornell, about 10 years ago now. And that was this big moment we saw in identical twins. They have really different gut microbiomes, very different gut communities. And that was the point for me. They said, well, the difference is so big and you can manipulate it easily with diet and lifestyle. that's what I'm going to pursue and become an expert in that. And I think this is very much the future. And that really led to everything else and led to me, having this sort of transformational view of nutrition.
I love that.
Knowing about this new mechanism, which really, for me, could explain so much of things that we've got wrong in the past. And that led
your
to me
research
writing these books.
took you down that path of explaining why we're different. And, what is the root of why we're different started with the genetics, epigenetics, and now down to the gut microbiome. Before we get too deep into our conversation, I want to introduce Georgia. There she is. Georgia is from the Zoe team, and she's the one who put this webinar together. This is the first time that Tim and I are face to face, which is very exciting for me. Georgia, would you explain to the audience how they're going to be able to ask questions here?
Yeah, sure. I keep putting it in the chat, but I can see all of you are so excited to introduce yourselves, so it's getting a bit lost. But at the bottom of your screen, you'll be able to see a Q&A function. If you press that button and you have any questions at all, you'll be able to enter in there. What's quite nice as well is you can also upvote other people's questions if someone had the same question as you or you think it's particularly interesting. And we also have a list, which I'm sure you'll be dying to answer, of maybe 30 questions that people submitted before the session. So we'll be working our way through those as well.
Awesome. Well, thank you so very much, Georgia. So yeah, y'all go down. I see the chat is really going, but I'm not reading. I can just see that the numbers going up, but Q&A is where you want to ask your questions. But we also have the pool of questions that were submitted ahead of time. So I want to tell the audience when I first came across your work, Tim, was 2015. I came across the diet myth, and I don't even really know how I ended up with it, but I tended to buy any book with diet in the name of it, anything that was on Amazon. I was fascinated to just learn more. And I had just lost 75 pounds with intermittent fasting at that point in my journey. And so I started reading your book, and I can remember I had like a group of friends that were also doing intermittent fasting. And I remember like sending them, we had like a messenger chat, and I remember sending them like, oh my God, look what I just read. And, sending them things from the diet myth, because it really was busting some of those myths that we all had so ingrained. And so, then you ended up writing Spoonfed a few years later, which I was also excited to read. But, the whole ideas from the diet myth, like tell us just a few of the things that you talked about in that book.
Well, I guess there were the things that I've been brought up as a doctor to believe were absolutely true. And therefore, you couldn't really question it.
Right.
Things like all calories are equal, and that, calories in equals calories out. And basically a diet is all about counting what goes in and what goes out and getting that balance right. And then the rest is easy. And if you fail, you're just lazy or not very good at measuring. And that's what most doctors are taught, and probably still taught today. So I think that was then there was, things about fats being universally bad for you, which again, most doctors still tend to believe, although it's modified a bit in the last couple of years, I'm pleased to say. We discussed a little bit about fasting, and
a little bit.
I touched on at that time this dangerous concept that is certainly very big in the UK, and I think also in the US, about missing breakfast. That was, the worst thing your parents could do to you as a kid was to deprive you of breakfast in some way, and that we were all sort of indoctrinated that you had to have lots of things at breakfast. And of course, most people are having a very high carb breakfasts nowadays, right, thanks to Mr. Kellogg and others, telling us how essential it was.
And ultra-processed foods. Our breakfasts were like a Pop-Tart, like literally. That is what I remember having, a Pop-Tart, which is probably the very worst way to start your day, right?
Yeah, that's quite hard to beat, actually, I think. Yeah, I think makes English baked beans sound very healthy.
Well, that English baked beans are very healthy compared to a Pop-Tart. That would be true.
Yeah, that's right. So, but it was, those sugary cereals and, the Honey Loops and the special Cheerios and things like that. They have 40% sugar. So,
right.
The idea that, and also, the idea that they were okay as long as they had reduced sugar on the label, and you didn't have to worry about it. So,
or it says whole grains, right? They put that on there. They add some whole grains in there, and you're like, this is a healthy breakfast, and they fortify it with vitamins. You feel like you're doing the right thing. Yeah.
So a few of I'm trying to remember the other ones. So obviously, there was the whole question about whether meat was really bad for you or not, and that was just starting to sort of appear on that horizon. This debate that theory was it was fatty meat was bad for you, and sort of rest of meat was okay, and it was putting that into some context, and the idea that we should be eating small amounts all the time, I think, was the other big message at the time. Do you remember we were told to graze, not gorge?
Yes. Oh yeah, we were absolutely told that, and the conventional wisdom behind that was the more often you eat, the more often you're, stimulating your metabolism, you're up-regulating your metabolism, boost that metabolism by eating 6 times a day or whatever, with the whole misconception of, well, yes, eating does get your metabolism going, but not to the point that it negates all the food that you just ate. So it's not like a winning math formula. If you're eating a lot of food, it's not boosting it more than the food you just ate.
But very often, when I was doing the research of the book, I tried to get the original articles it was based on, and they tended to be stuff written 30 years before, based on 9 nutrition students in a university that were sort of bribed to do it for credits. And, it just wouldn't stack up today as a serious paper. And yet, around the world, it's been like, it's like following the Bible because of this. No one was ever questioned it or got the funds to do the study properly.
And it was just something we all knew it was true. We just knew it.
And that's why, snack bars were invented to fulfill the dream of what the scientists and the food companies have supposedly been telling us about how to be healthy. So, and that's why we're in this mess today. So there were lots of things like that. But I think the other thing was that, a lot of these mistakes we've been making in nutrition could in a way be explained by understanding the gut microbes. And I think that was the other. And I in Dartmouth, I started to address this idea of individuality, although my later book, Spoonfed, has got much more about that reality. We're all different and we all respond to foods very differently.
What I really remember from really sticking out, besides what you've already said, is the story about your son in the Diet Myth. And for people who haven't read the Diet Myth, can you tell them a little bit about that? He did something where he ate, was it McDonald's? What did he do? Yeah,
so Dartmouth is full of me doing silly self-experiments, some which worked, some which failed miserably. And I was due to be doing a 10 days McDonald's only diet when I suddenly said, oh, maybe, I don't fancy this much. And my son appeared, who happened to be staying at home. He was at university and he liked McDonald's and he was hard up for cash. And he was also going to do it as part of his dissertation. So he ticked all the boxes, and he did it for 10 days. And we measured his microbes before and after. And he didn't feel well at all. And he seemed to go yellower and yellower. But he did finish it, but he lost about 40% of his gut microbes.
Wow.
His diversity went down really
in 10 days. See, that's striking.
Yeah. Now, it's only a study of one.
Right.
So maybe, not everyone's like that. But I think what is interesting is I've been following up every year or two, and he still hasn't got back to average. He's still in the bottom 10% of species diversity. So I think to me that that really highlighted two things that, we've been looking at junk foods the wrong way. We've been thinking about it just in terms of fats and sugars and salt, ignored all the other chemicals in there that are likely to be harmful for our microbes, but also ignored the fact that if you just have those kind of foods, you're starving your body, your microbes, of real food. And it's that combination of that starvation of the real food plus the other, the extra chemicals.
Like the preservatives, for example. They're
preservatives, the emulsifiers, the glues that stick it all together, plus all these other stuff we don't even know or can't understand on the label. So I think that it was a new way of looking at why junk food is bad for us. I think that was quite a big, for me, it was quite a big moment. And I think that's become, in a way, the number one objective of our work is to tell people, what's bad about ultra-processed food and how, try and get us to eat less of it and get everybody, back to whole foods.
Yeah, I really think so. And instead of, fighting the diet wars, like my diet is better than your diet, just go back to real foods, because we know all the research on ultra processed foods. Usually in the literature, it's hard to find 100% agreement on any one topic, but I've yet to find a published study that found ultra processed foods better for our bodies in any way, shape, or form.
Well, there are very few studies for a reason that the food companies really didn't. They lobbied against it. So it was only about 3 years ago the first study was published, amazingly. They used to do this in mice, and there was lots of studies feeding mice burgers and things and fries, but no decent-sized human trials until 3 years ago, which is amazing, considering we've been eating this stuff since the 1970s. And the food companies just love the idea that we say it's if it's due to the fat and the sugar, we just replace the fat with protein extract, and we replace the sugar with artificial sweeteners, and suddenly that's going to make it healthy. No, but that's, they won that marketing campaign, and that's what appears on packaging. And I guess most of the general public believe it.
Well, I believed it for so long. I can remember back in, my first diet where other than counting calories, it was when the fat gram craze of the 1990s, and fat was bad and everything was replaced. They replaced it, but with stuff that's not food. But I was fully buying into it, like, oh, fat is bad, but then I'm going to eat all these snack wells and it's going to be great for me. But it wasn't good for me at all. So
yeah, I switched from butter to some horrible spread with pictures of Italian peasants on it, thinking it was healthy, but it was just dyed gray gunge that,
if it was its natural color, we wouldn't eat it.
No, exactly.
Well, I want to make sure to let everybody know, before we started, Georgia set up a special promo code for anybody who hasn't had a chance to try Zoe yet that wanted to. And this promo code is 15% off instead of the normal rate. And so it could be up to $100 off, depending on which plan you get. But the special promo code just for the webinar is IF Live 15. So IF Live 15 for 15% off on Zoe. So I just want to make sure to get that out there. Georgia, do you want to start asking the questions now? Or are you ready for that? I mean, I could just talk to Tim, just the two of us with no questions for a long time, but I know we want to get to the questions.
And I think we'd all be really happy to listen to you. It's been so interesting so far. But yes, we have got lots of interesting questions. I'm going to start off with the ones which were kind of asked before the session, just to kind of go through in that order. So if I haven't got to yours from the Q&A yet, we will get to them. And the first question that I wanted to ask, I think it's a great question from Christy. She said, if there was one and only one thing we could do to improve our gut health, what would it be?
That's for you, Tim. Take it away.
I have
a guess. I think I know what you're going to say. Can I guess? Maybe I should guess. Could I guess what I think you're going to say and you tell me if I'm right?
Go on.
I would think you're going to say increase the diversity of plant foods in your diet and aim to get a wide variety of plant foods from day to day. Is that the answer?
Yeah. You can do my job. It's easy. Anyone can be a professor. I would just say, an aim for 30 plants a week. That's what I tell people. It's nice to have a number, makes people think about it, and remember that a plant isn't just kale.
Right.
It's a plant is a nut, a seed. It's virtually everything we eat, but in its whole form. And so it's not nearly as hard as it sounds when you say 30, but it's that if you get mainly plant-based and you get diversity, then the rest is easy.
We're actually, a few of us are doing something inspired by that. I'm keeping a list for all of January instead of like per week, like what I have over the whole month of January. And I'm up to, I think, like 70 different plant foods so far in the month of January. So I'm feeling really good about that.
Yeah, I think it's a fun thing to do. And
it is fun.
And it makes you try and, when you go to the shops, try and, I don't recognize that strange looking vegetable. Maybe I should just have it and fry it up and see what it's like. Or
what it does, yeah.
Some weird Chinese fruit or whatever. So, yeah, I think it teaches us to get out of our ruts and be more adventurous. And I think we all get in those ruts, and, myself included. So I think having some little goal or, give yourself a star chart or, an extra drink when you've got your special 30. I always say red wine counts as a plant. So
that's
good to know. All right, George, are we ready for another one?
Definitely. I found another question that I think follows on quite nicely. So Shannon asked, what is more beneficial for my gut health? A meal with 15 varieties of plant, therefore small portions, or a meal with 2 to 6 plant varieties, but bigger portions?
I'm going to leave that one for Tim.
Probably the one with the multiple plants, but what we don't know yet is what the minimum amount of plant you need to sustain your gut microbiome. We're sort of guessing at this level of detail. So we don't know when on your salad, when you cut up a tiny bit of parsley, whether that really counts or not. And it's similar to this lack of knowledge we have about breaking intermittent fasting. Does one drop of milk really make a difference, or does just smelling some food, or does a black coffee or tea? So, but I think if we're talking about tiny amounts, then the Middle Eastern buffet style would be better. But I don't think people should be driven by too many rules.
Yeah.
You want to be diverse in your diversity. So different meal styles and things will also encourage more adventurousness and things. So doesn't have to be 12 plants with every meal. Don't
stress about it.
No, don't get into some thing that you get freaked out if you're one short. You have to go to the shops and stop your meal.
All right, Georgia, do you have another one for us?
Yes, I do. So we have a question from Margot who said, what does sugar do to the gut? I swear I'm still bloated from eating sweets over Christmas. Thank you.
Sugar. What does it do to the gut?
Well, what's really interesting, we don't really know how the sugar interacts with our gut microbes. Most sugar, if it's natural sugar and not hidden away in lots of high fiber foods, will be released very early on in the gut. So it gets released in the small intestine. And so it never makes it to where most of the gut microbes are. We think the small intestine does contain gut microbes, but they're mainly involved in signaling. So we think they sense what's going on in terms of sugar, and they will send signals down to their mates lower in the gut, and those guys will have a metabolic response and triggers your insulin and your glucose, and will sort of expect more sugar. It sort of says, right, sugar's coming, let's prepare for a carb treat. And so your body will be stressed to some extent by that response, depending on how much it is, what you've eaten before, your age, and your sensitivity to sugars. So we know it has some effect on the gut microbiome. It's complicated how it interacts because of it's not going directly there. It definitely has an effect on your blood sugar peak. And we know from other studies that 3 hours after you've had some sugar, you often get 1 in 4 people get a sugar dip, and that actually stimulates your brain to make you more hungry and eat more. So it's really complicated. There are lots of things that happen when you just swallow a sugar cube or a sugary drink or an orange juice.
Yep. All right. Very good.
Following on from that, we've had a couple of people asking the same question. They said they've been fasting for almost 2 years, or someone said they're new to fasting, but what they've experienced since they've started intermittent fasting is that they're really experiencing more sensitivity to sugar and they tend to crash more. And I wonder, Gin, is that something that you would expect or maybe you've experienced?
I really think that we just become more in tune with our bodies as we become an intermittent faster. And like for me, I've been doing intermittent fasting since 2014. And I used to live on that blood sugar roller coaster all day long. I was fueled by glucose all day, and I would start with whatever it was for breakfast. I often would drive through a popular chicken restaurant and get chicken minis and have a Coke with it and hash browns. I mean, what was I doing? And then I would have latte mid-morning and a snack and lunch. And so I was always up and down and up and down. And then when I started intermittent fasting and my body became fat adapted, now I'm able to have that steady energy during the fast. But then when you open your eating window, like if I started with something that's high in sugar, like if I open my eating window with, say, a latte, a sugary latte, I would feel that difference immediately, because my body's been running on that, being fat adapted, steady fuel state. And then woo, now I've introduced, there's the high, and then bam, there's the crash. So it's not necessarily that you are more sensitive. It's just that you're now in a state where you feel it more. At least that's what it's been for me, more so. Would you want to add anything to that, Tim?
Yeah, I don't know of any scientific studies that have looked at people, in these situations. So, we're hoping that we'll be able to gather this sort of information in Zoe, because so many people joining Zoe are actually intermittent fasters of some kind. And so comparing people who've been doing it for a couple of years with people who never do it, I think will be an interesting thing that will come out. We should have those results in about 6 months or so. So I think that's a really interesting thing to look at. And I do suspect that we know that obviously eating a lot of sugar can influence your body. Whether fasting will change it, I don't know.
Yeah.
Open question, but I think it's a very interesting one. And maybe it depends how long the fasting is for as well. And, we talk about it as one thing, but,
right.
Everyone has a different version of it, I think. And I think we're still...
we actually teach that in our community, that there is no one size fits all way to do intermittent fasting. And it's all about finding what feels right to you, whether that's fasting length, window length, how the foods make you feel, all that sort of thing. But I think none of us feel our best when it's really high sugar all the time. I think that's what we figure out. And we might not realize that we certainly didn't feel our best. And now you're feeling so good. It's so much more extreme when it feels bad. That's my hunch.
I think that's right. I mean, I used to have very sugary breakfasts, 15 years ago, and was always a bit tired at midday and just said, oh, well, that's just because I'm a busy doctor and, need to get more sleep. But now I either don't have breakfast or I have a high fat breakfast. I just don't get those midday dips. But you have to, as you said, start thinking about your body, not just to assume that everyone's the same. Therefore, and we start listening to our own machines, really. And I think that's where the power is. Key message. Yeah.
Absolutely. We've had lots of questions from people about probiotic supplements. I know, Tim, this is a bit of a favorite area to talk about. So someone asked, what do you think of probiotic supplements?
Probiotic supplements work if you've got a common disease, at least in 75% of the trials done. What no one agrees on is what type of probiotic to take, or what dose, or how you actually obtain it in real life outside a trial, because the quality of probiotics you get in the stores is really unregulated. Mm-hmm. And the other worry I have about probiotics is that, given that we all have a very unique microbiome, how do you get the one that's tailored for you when, three of us will have very different microbiome needs, and they're going to have very different effects. So I'd rather, there's no evidence that probiotics prevent disease, so there's no point taking them preventively. There's some evidence they work in things like depression and anxiety, which is good news. And there's some evidence they work in infections and mild GI problems. But in general, I think I'd rather take my probiotics through natural fermented foods rather than through tablets that come, off a shipment container from China. Right. And then that's generally, and you're likely to get a much wider range of probiotics from foods than you would from those capsules or tablets. And I think that's the lesson. Until we're in a state where we can actually personalize the probiotics you need based on your own gut microbiome, we're much better hedging our bets and having a kefir or kombuchas or yogurts or kimchis too, if we want it. So that's what I do. Is I have a shot of, always make sure I've got a shot of some fermented food every day, and that way I'm getting a variety of different microbes in me. Because some of these kefirs and kombuchas particularly can have up to 30 different microbial species.
I need to get back to that. I was having, I never know how to say it. Kefir? Well, I always want to say kefir.
Americans generally say kefir, and I remember Kiefer Sutherland is the only one.
But I don't think that's right. I think we might say it, but I think we're saying it wrong. But
the Brits say, they are. You confuse me now. Kefir, yes.
Kefir. And also kombucha. I there was a period of time where I was having kombucha all the time. I think it might have been right after I read Spoonfed, maybe. I don't know. But I've gotten out of the habit of having it. So I need to bring that back in. So you don't take any prebiotic or probiotics. You just eat the food.
I used to, yeah. But now I'm just, get your bugs in the food and treasure that, that variety. Because I think in general, but, I'm not saying never use them. And I think I'd much rather take a probiotic than antidepressant for mild depression, for example. So
they're not going to hurt you. It's not going to hurt you to take a probiotic. It just might not help you.
Correct. And you may need to try lots of different ones until you find ones that suits you. So it could end up being quite expensive and time consuming to go through the whole rack and work out which one it is that's going to work.
All right. Do we have another one?
Yeah, I have a question that's related to this, which came from Amy. So there was a study published earlier this year from Chris Gardner, who's on the scientific advisory board at Zoe, which looked at the benefit of having 5 portions of fermented foods on the gut microbiome. And they found that actually improved diversity and also reduced inflammation, which is really exciting. What Amy asked is, this study obviously included 5 portions of fermented foods, which is a lot and doesn't work if you're doing 1 meal a day fasting. So what would you recommend for someone who's doing 1 meal a day for getting their fermented foods in?
Well, I would probably go with the one with the maximal impact. So I think probably the one, some of these are drinks, right? So you don't need a lot. And I don't think we're talking about a huge portion. Right. Small amounts really work. So I take a shot of kombucha or kefir. And
I don't think that's right either here. Kefir. I like it like that better.
Kefir.
Yeah.
Or a little pot of kimchi that you just put on the side that isn't going to really, just in addition on your plate. And if you do that, that's fine. So I think you think small and powerful, not large volumes of it. You don't need to have pots of yogurt to have an effect.
We hear that from a lot of people with intermittent fasting because it's been so ingrained in our heads. I know in England, y'all say 5 a day. That's the terminology. You're encouraged to eat 5 a day. And people are like, well, if I have an eating window and my eating window is 4 hours long, how am I going to cram a whole serving? I mean, the idea of that it must be, a full government sanctioned serving, I think is what gets people, like it doesn't have to be a full, like, this is one serving size of a tomato, right? Just have some tomato, have some variety.
Exactly. Yeah. And these official serving sizes are a complete nonsense. And they're mainly made up.
Thank you for saying that.
By the food industry to,
or it's just what was convenient.
sell you more food than you need. That's usually, and then you say, oh, well, you've been a bit of a piggy overeating, because they gave you a tiny portion size or a massive one. It's there's no real size thing as a real portion size. You've got to work it out for yourself. So
the portion is how much you need to be delicious, right? It's however much tomato makes your meal delicious is the right serving for your meal.
Yeah, no, I think that's a great point.
All right. If anybody hears a trash truck, I'm sorry. The trash truck just pulled up. It's Wednesday. All right. I might mute myself for a second. Do you have a question, Georgia?
I do. Amanda asked a question for Tim. She said, as a rheumatologist, have you observed much effect of fasting on bones?
No is the answer. It takes a long time for bones to change. We change our skeleton every 8 years. So we generally used to follow people up with a bone density scan every 3 years. And so I think the time scales of both are really hard to gauge. But we do know that diet and bone, there was a big story about how you had to drink lots of milk if you were having osteoporosis and things, and that's been completely disproven. Although I'm probably blamed for telling lots of people to drink milk. So having lots of extra calcium and milk really is shown not to help your bone health. So probably the same things, diversity of diet, help your gut microbes, as well as exercise are good. And so there's just no data on intermittent fasting and bone health. But if you go along with the general holistic idea, there's no reason it should be bad. And
I know that Jason Fung has anecdotally, this is not scientific study here, but anecdotally, they found that with the people they work with in their practice, they have found some increases in bone density over time. But again, it's not a scientific study. It's anecdotal. It's what they're finding. And, there's some suggested mechanisms of action for that. But, over time, you are your own study of one, and everyone has different needs. You want to just make sure you're having sufficient minerals, I think, in your diet, not necessarily through dairy, but you're eating sufficient minerals that we get through our plants. And so your body doesn't have to leach it out of your bones, right?
Yeah, no, I think that's the general principle. But we've moved away from taking calcium vitamins, because they didn't get absorbed into your body. They got absorbed into your blood vessels and gave you heart disease. So not only do they not work in the trials, but they're also associated with increased risk of heart disease. So again, get your calcium from, Italian mineral water or broccoli or, other mushrooms. There's plenty of sources. And again, if you're having your 20 or 30 plants a week, you don't have to worry about any of these things. You'll get them naturally.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Amazing. Debbie asked, she said she's curious how long it takes to change your microbiome with diet and lifestyle adjustments. And she's just joined Zoe a week ago. She just got her results a week ago. So that's really exciting.
Okay. So I guess you want to change them. You haven't got perfect scores. None of us do have perfect scores, I should say. So we can all improve. Mm-hmm. The question sort of depends how extreme your diet is or your health is. So people with really bad gut microbes and terrible diets will get better within a week. Although the tests may not show anything for maybe a month. And remember, some of your microbes only live a few hours and change every night. So just by intermittent fasting, you're going to change your microbe composition a bit. So some will change, but most people have a third of their microbes that don't change much at all. It takes a long time to get rid of those ones you want to get rid of. So it all depends how bad your current diet is and how good the one is you're going to move towards. Depends if you're a meat eater or a plant eater. Many factors like this will determine it. But generally, we say that by about 3 months, most people have altered their gut microbiomes, and some much faster.
Good info. All right, what you got?
So Wendy asked, she said, what is your opinion of keto? I feel like this could get quite heated.
Keto.
You want to go first, Jen?
What do you feel? How do you feel about the keto diet?
Well, I think it does work for some people.
Mm-hmm.
And, it's easy to dismiss it all. But, I've seen some patients with obese, with diabetes, who have done really well on it.
Right.
And got off their medications and are able to sustain that diet with a bit of supervision for at least a couple of years. So, I think there is definitely a place for it in our use, and compared to some of the other treatments for diabetes, it's probably preferable, certainly preferable to insulin.
Yeah.
So yes, but there are also some people who it doesn't work at all for, who tolerate fats badly and don't process them well, and like you, who feel sick on them and say, "What's all the fuss about? This is revolting," and feel nauseated. And I mean, I went on a keto diet unintentionally for the diet myth when I was just eating French cheese all day as my only source of food. I by day 3, I felt very unwell.
And we love cheese. So that's, but cheese is delicious.
You can have too much of a good thing. So I think there are some people who will tolerate keto and some and many who won't. If you are in that category that process it well, and Zoe will tell you how well you process fats, keto does work, but most of the people on keto diets don't seem to follow the diversity. They don't look after the rest of their gut microbes. So the danger is that after a year or two, they'll have decimated their gut microbiomes, and that will have a sort of knock-on effect long term. So I think there is probably a way of someone inventing a sort of plant diverse gut microbiome friendly keto for those who support it, but it's definitely not a general panacea.
It wouldn't be just meat and dairy. You got to get those plant foods in there. And, when we're seeing people who are doing more that style of keto now, which is good to see, the more plant forward, like I think it was a ketotarian. They're they're vegetarian ketos out there that are really, getting plenty of plants in. Yeah.
Well, I think that's where it's probably going, because people will say that in its current form, it's not very sustainable. Mm-hmm. Yes, you'll lose weight, rapidly, but if short term you'll feel better, but if long term you feel worse and your health is worse, it's not going to work. So there needs to be a pattern where you can do it sustainably, possibly with restriction time eating or intermittent fasting, and plant diversity and feeding of microbes.
Yeah, and I actually did not lose weight on keto at all. I probably really overdid the dairy, as we're saying, but I didn't lose any weight or feel good or anything. So that was just not good for my body at all. But I have seen it be amazing for people. So I'm not knocking it in general. Just like you said, for the people that do feel great on it, they're not lying. They are truly feel better. And I believe them. So,
So, everyone should experiment. Don't be put off experimenting, safely, not doing anything too radical, but, just by changing around your breakfast, have a keto breakfast and a carbo breakfast, and or a totally plant breakfast and see what happens.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
All right, Georgia, you got another one for us?
I do. I think this is a great question from Angie. She said, how does your microbiome influence the food that you desire?
Your cravings. We actually talked a little bit about that before the webinar. So
we did.
Take that away, Tim.
Yeah. So the science tells you that some very cool experiments is in insects can manipulate with very small little forks. They can change the diets, the microbes and the guts of insects. And by manipulating them, they can make those insects eat more protein or more yeasts. And so they know that the microbes are actually sending signals to the insect's brain to saying what to eat. So that, in a way, proves that, in theory, microbes can control animal behavior in terms of eating. The problem is we haven't proven this in humans. Mm-hmm. And we've got both good examples and bad examples. And there are other animals that also get signals when they're zinc deficient or some other mineral deficient to go and certain goats to eat certain berries and things off leaves, traveling 100 miles to do so. So we know that there are these things in evolution that will do this to drive us to get some of these things. And, we have general salt cravings is one thing that we generally also get as humans when we're deficient. Mm-hmm. Now, there's also the possibility that junk food also creates a bad set of inflammatory microbes that some people believe could actually keep driving that your brain to keep seeking the same high fat, high sugar chemical stimulants. And so that's possible. And there are various animal experiments sort of replicating this, but no one's done it in humans. So I think really it theoretically can occur. We don't know in humans how much it actually affects us in reality. But it's a nice thing to think about, because I do think once it's a bit like when I changed giving up meat and I went back on meat and I've done various things like that. And once you do change your diet quite a lot, you do reset, I think, your cravings, and it does take a while for them to wear off. And then you realize you no longer crave meat after a while. And I think probably the same would be true of junk food. We know it's true of things like coffee, which has addictive chemicals. So I think it's quite logical it does happen. I think we don't quite know enough about how it works in reality. But all of these things, if you're having trouble changing your diet, just give it a bit of time and those cravings will generally wear off. I think that's if you're trying to get healthier.
Yeah, I think so too.
And that's great advice. We've had a couple of questions which I can kind of pull together, which are asking about how your gut microbiome is actually linked to your blood sugar and your blood fat. So in Zoe, those are the 3 areas that we test. And does the gut microbiome make a difference to your insulin levels, to your blood sugar response, and to your blood fat response?
The short answer is yes. And we don't understand how it affects the sugar levels. As sort of I explained with the other thing about when you eat sugar. And it's probably through signaling from the microbes up here down to the ones in your lower gut. We do understand more about how fat and microbes interact. And there are many fat-busting microbes that you produce when you're on fat diets. You will build up your set of gut microbes that break down the fats into fatty acids, which can be healthy. They're not necessarily unhealthy. And they do that early on in the gut and also in the colon. And so I think in our PREDICT studies, we did work out that the microbiome had an even bigger effect on how you break down fats than it did on how you break down sugars. And they actually release chemicals that break down the fats or stimulate your gallbladder to produce other chemicals. Interesting, there's a special bug in us, at least it's in 1/3 of British guts and in 10% of American guts. and it's a parasite called blastocystis, and that is a fat-busting parasite. It likes eating fat and produces chemicals to break it down. So it's actually a good one to have.
Yeah, I think I didn't have that one. Is that one that comes on your Zoe report?
It is, yeah.
And it says whether you either have it or you don't.
And what's really interesting is it seems to be a general marker in a population of how healthy the diet is. So it's like 30% in the UK. I think it's 10% in the US. And I think if you go to Africa, it's about 95%. And in Mediterranean countries, it's like 50%. So it's a pretty good marker. And we might have killed them off with antibiotics as well, or processed foods and things. So
that's my guess with me. Can you get it back, or is it just gone? It's gone forever?
I can sell you mine if you want.
Okay. Ship it over. There's a little no. I wondered, because like I said, I think I don't have it, but I took a lot of antibiotics over the years. I haven't had one since, I don't know, maybe 2015, 2016. I haven't needed one, but over the years before intermittent fasting, I was so inflamed and I was just getting every infection that came along, and it would always have ear infections. And so, yeah.
No, I think they've had is one antibiotic course a year is the average in America. So by the age of 18, most people had 18 courses. So that gets rid of about a third of your gut microbe diversity already. So we need to change.
I was probably on the upper level of antibiotic, of how much people took. I was always needing an antibiotic for something or another. And again, it's been, what is it, like 7 years now, I haven't needed one. So that's exciting to think of. But I also was very heavy processed foods. I was like, I did everything probably that had the worst kind of gut microbiome you could have.
Well, it's amazing you're still alive, isn't it? So
I know.
You're a credit.
Of how strong people are. We can overcome even the junky diets and antibiotics. All right, Georgia, what you got for us?
There was a really interesting question. I'm just trying to find it, but someone asked, so Anne asked, Gin, I'm curious to see how you changed your diet with Zoe.
It helped me to understand. Like, I wasn't surprised that I didn't clear fat well, just from, my experiences with keto. And also when I did those crazy low fat diets back in the day, that was when I was really able to lose weight and did really well on those overall. Never did well on a low carb diet. So it helped me understand why that was. I was disappointed in my blood sugar clearance also being low, but it really helped me to see that diversity of what I eat with plants matters, and also the combining of the foods. That's what I really enjoyed seeing with, playing with the Zoe app and seeing what would happen if I add 1 egg or 2 eggs, or oops, I shouldn't also add the avocado and the butter, right, for me. And things that I thought would be, high scoring meals ended up being, really too much fat. So I learned that for me, it's better to scale back the added fat mindfully. Now I put as much fat on the food till it's delicious. That's pretty much the way I craft my plate, but it just really helped me be more mindful of, adding the beans, adding the diversity. And that's really how it's changed long-term for me.
Amazing. That's so wonderful to hear. Oh, sorry, Tim.
Did you swap any long-term things that for alternatives that you got into a habit of? Like I used to always eat bananas as my regular fruit, and now I swap them for apples or pears because they
they score higher.
The score is at least 10 higher than a banana. So did you have any other similar things like that?
I did. I realized pasta is not as good for me, so I eat less of that. So just I don't avoid it completely, but really no. Other than just being, adding more things in, because I'm also at the point, I got the clean-ish. I really care a lot about, at my age, I'm 52. I was on that diet roller coaster for so many years. I just really want to enjoy my food and I want to feel good. So, I know that there comes a point, like if I've had too much sugar, for example, I know my body's not going to clear it well. So I'm just going to have a little bit instead of more. So that's really what it helped me to do, to realize that, feeling good, choosing what I eat every day in my window, not really like saying, no, I can never have that, but, not going to be as satisfied from the pasta as I would be from rice, for example.
Amazing. I think that's really useful to hear. So Jill asked a question. There's a few questions about this in the chat. She said, clearly I haven't read Tim's books yet, but what is it about plants that improves the gut microbiome? Is it that we're just feeding them with fiber? And if so, shouldn't we just try and ingest the correct microbes, for example, probiotics, so they're present in the first place? So Tim, could you elaborate on why plants are so important?
Yes. So plants are important for a number of reasons. So the old-fashioned view is it was fiber, but we now know that fiber is really complicated and nobody really understands it. So it's like,
I love talking to scientists.
There's multiple types of fiber, and each of them will different microbes will feed off. And that's why artificial fibers, just one type, don't really cut it. So the fiber itself, which we used to think as roughage and just to get you to go to the toilet quicker,
like a broom, we thought it just swept things out.
Mm-hmm. That's now ancient history. But as well as the fiber in the plant, you've got all the nutrients that are released from it, which are then absorbed. But you also got, importantly for the gut microbes, there's something in them that only they can use, and that's called these defense chemicals called polyphenols. And they are, there are hundreds of them. There's tens of thousands of them actually. And each set of plants will have a different set of polyphenols. And these are, what these are when you have slightly sour grapes or red wine that's tannic on the tongue, that astringency, or you see berries, skins of berries, dark colors, blue cyanins, nuts, seeds, extra virgin olive oil, that sort of peppery taste and flavor on the tongue. All these very dark chocolate, all these indicate polyphenols, which used to be called antioxidants before doctors and scientists realized they hadn't got a clue what that meant. So that's why plants are good in the whole form and not in the processed form, because all these things get removed once you stick them in a factory and process them. But have them uniquely, you're getting not only different fibers, different nutrients and vitamins, you're also getting different polyphenols, which are rocket fuel for your gut microbes. They use that as energy, and then they produce all these chemicals which help your immune system in your body.
And the key is that scientists haven't even identified all of the different compounds that are in these plant foods. We don't even know. So like supplements, they've pulled out a few things that they think are important, but turns out they were wrong about a lot of them.
Yeah, they've identified 30,000 chemicals, most of which we don't know what they do.
Right.
And yet, we all have this reduced idea of, we think of a banana, we think of potassium and,
right.
And Djokovic having a banana at half time, and we don't think of the other 600 chemicals that are in that with amazing effects we still don't understand. And that's why this reductionism also leads us to then, the industry of vitamin and supplementation, which is, done out of ignorance because we're just ignoring everything else in those plants and trying to recreate guessed on some total guess about what's good about that particular plant.
Exactly. We are almost out of time, Georgia. How are we doing with the questions?
We still have quite a lot of questions to go. I feel like if anyone has any questions that we haven't answered, I would be more than happy to answer them. If you send an email to hello@joinzoe.com, we can get to those.
Especially Zoe specific questions.
Yeah.
One thing, actually today in the community, someone posted something about Zoe and said, there's the trash truck again. Sorry, everybody. But they were like, the Zoe customer support is just absolutely amazing. And I just wanted to pass that along to y'all because I think it is as well. So ask Zoe any of your questions through the email.
And it's great to see that so many of you are so interested, and we can definitely see about hosting one of these again, or maybe with another scientist as well. So yeah, it's great to kind of have all of your support and all of you asking so many interesting questions. What I'm going to do now is put some links in the chat so that you can follow Tim, follow Gin, order Jin's amazing new book. Tim's also just re-released a new version of his book, Spoonfed. So definitely, if you want to dive deeper, those are really amazing resources. I'll also link to the Zoe website. We have loads of blogs on there, which are all kind of medically reviewed for you to be able to get some information about a lot of the topics which we've been speaking about. So let me just copy and paste that in now.
Do you have any final question that you've saved up that you want to throw out there for us?
Oh, it's so difficult to choose because I think there's still 20 left. There's one question which I'd like to ask, but only because I think it might allow Tim to talk about the kind of gut immune connection. And there's been a few questions about COVID and gut health, but there's one question which Fred asked, which is said, does the gut microbiome make a difference to your food allergies? And I thought maybe you could talk a little bit about the kind of immune connection there and maybe bring in some of the COVID stuff as well.
Perfect.
Yeah, so one of the strongest associations we find is between a disordered gut microbiome and food allergies. Some of that is causal, some of it might just be association, but very strong links. And we've known that the immune system and food and the gut microbiome are very closely related, and lots of animal studies and cross-sectional human studies as well. So that go also from babies and mums and this transfer of these immune traits. And during COVID, we found out that because Zoe did this COVID app that had over 5 million people using it, and did a study of 1 million people's diets and their COVID experience, found out that those who had the most severe COVID episodes and going to hospital and long duration and long COVID had poorer diet quality, even when you adjusted for obesity, diabetes, drugs, everything else. So diet quality was the number one factor influencing your immune response to COVID. So I think that's a pretty good experiment of 1 million people. Mm-hmm. And I think it just tells how important looking after our gut microbes are for our general immunity, which not only fights infection, it's good for it regulates our allergies and immune system, autoimmune disease when it goes wrong, aging, and fights early cancer. So all of these things are hugely important. So yeah, I think we're on the tip of, beginning of a journey as we uncover all this stuff. But it sounds like you guys are on the right track.
And really, just to sum it all up, the answer is eat real food as much as you can, and diversity of plants. I think that's it. That's what we need to
with a shot of Kiefer Sutherland.
There you go. Shot of Kiefer Sutherland. Now I'm going to have to go to Sprouts and get some kombucha and some kefir. I've really enjoyed this so very much, Tim. I can't thank you enough. And also thank you for writing the foreword to Cleanish. It
was a great pleasure, and a great pleasure to be on stage with you.
Well, thank you so much. And Georgia, thank you for setting this all up. It's been so much fun.
Thanks, everybody.